Hello there. Yeah, I was just trying to explain the isolation, lockdown, and abuses I'd suffered during my ordeal with sinus cancer. And this started, of course, with the isolation, self-imposed isolation in 1995. I wasn't completely isolated, I hasten to add. I was just more isolated than your average person, that's all. And in 2003, 8 years later, I suddenly became the victim of these a whole string of physical assaults that started with this chap here, Dan Marshall, who decided to come at me with a brick. Took a disliking to me, probably saw I looked quite unwell, didn't look like a normal person, was in a vulnerable disposition, and he wasted no time taking advantage of that. And being the new boyfriend of my ex-girlfriend, he decided to come at me with a brick. And lo and behold, actually went running down to the police station to try and stitch me up with his own offences, with his own crimes, and he had a surprising amount of luck in even him and his then girlfriend Anita Fairbank were taking me to the Crown Court and literally trying to frame me for their own offences and make me look like the offender, stitch up this sick cancer patient and pop him in jail for offences that were committed against me, which almost came to pass. But the judge, I think, just saw that there was not, or there's something not quite right about all these lies and perjury and falsified statements, and just let me go at the end. But nevertheless, I mean, it's a very clear indication there that these offenders do tend to run down to the police station and try and stitch up, their victim whenever they have unleashed one of their horrible assaults upon them. So look out for that one. And as I say, this went on and on. I think rumours, as they do spread through the local community, did seem to encourage other people to jump on this bandwagon. I had other people launching assaults at me. This is friends of ex-girlfriends and relatives, etc. That all culminated in a brutal murder attempt. This is in 2012 by a chap called Asher Osmondson. And the timing of this brutal murder attempt was quite extraordinary in that it chimed exactly in with my discovery of some very effective treatments and ways to reverse the symptoms of sinus cancer, which I believe therefore is not a coincidence at all, and quite clearly could have been a motive for this chap Asher Osmondson to end my life. Now, the reasons for that can be more clearly seen in this little picture I've drawn here, which asks the question, who benefits from suppressing cures? Pharmaceutical companies seeking to peddle partially effective treatments, I think, should be top of the list, because very clearly the art of making a treatment, and they very clearly seem to have thousands of scientists out there given the task of finding treatments that are not 100% effective, only 50%, only 60% effective, which is extremely important, of course, because that keeps the customer coming back for more, and hopefully coming back for more until the day they die. Which is the most lucrative way to manage an illness, and of course they're only too aware of this. Now, jumping on the back of this bandwagon, you have charities, of course, who rush out claiming and pretending to look for cures, who in reality only spend their money on suppressing them. And this is a very common illusion that they erect for the public. That of being on an urgent quest to find a cure, when in reality they have been actively suppressing them as much and as violently as possible since you can remember. And of course their livelihoods depend on it. Their livelihoods depend on you not finding out, on the public not seeing through the illusion, in the knowledge that, of course, if they ever did, their salaries would end the same day. And their ill-gotten income would finish that same moment. So you can now begin to maybe appreciate, that these are two very large conglomerates who are extremely powerful. Pharmaceutical companies, some of the most powerful businesses on earth. Charities not far behind there, these cancer charities and health charities. And combined, I mean, make a an alarming force, that no one can reckon with, really. I mean, they can outnumber and outgun pretty much any opponent. And here comes the problem when, or the active employment of violent murdering bullies and psychopaths who are quietly cajoled, encouraged and excused while they routinely beat patients who discover effective cures to death. To suggest to you that basically these powerful businesses do pass money under the table and actively encourage violent murdering bullies and psychopaths to beat patients to death, and this includes even doctors and anybody else for that matter who runs about sharing information about effective natural treatments. They don't necessarily have to be natural. I mean, if they have any method that can permanently stop a terminal disease in its tracks and cure a patient, then they are in the firing line. And of course, the more effective the cure, the more violence they can expect. And the more they are threatening the salaries of these charities and pharmaceutical companies, with a potential cure, the more violence they can expect. To suggest to you that if you find a very effective cure, like for example for sinus cancer, that could stop quite possibly thousands of years of profiteering and manipulation, then you can almost 100% expect to be brutally murdered. And this, of course, it also suggests that these people are so rich they're able to pay off the police as well, in order just to keep the money flowing and make sure that there are no obstacles to their income in the future. Now, this then maybe gives a slightly clearer insight into what happened to me in 2012 and why I was the subject of such a brutal battering after struggling with sinus cancer for 17 years. I mean, why anyone should, deserve that kind of treatment after struggling with sinus cancer for 17 years, I'm not sure. And also add to that the fact that I was hit by a car that left me with quite a serious head injury when I was 14 years old. And you can see how desperate these people are to beat innocent patients to death. I mean, they are literally, not just keen, they are absolutely desperate. And I cannot underestimate or cannot suggest to you, how widespread this problem is, how much it's growing and evolving, and how many efforts are made just to cover up the truth. Whether this involves bribery, blackmail, bribing the police to shut up about it, sweep murders under the carpet, you name it, it's escalating daily. And it's therefore no surprise maybe to find that once I had managed, this is by about 2018, I'd managed to literally find a huge or collect a long list of very effective treatments to reverse my personal symptoms of sinus cancer, which then enabled me to round up my abusers, collect a lot of the evidence that I had lying about, pop them all in a net. This is all my abusers here that would have been frantically beating me since 2003. Collected all the evidence, popped it into YouTube videos, funnily enough, which you can find on my channel. There's dozens of them, and handed them all into the police, who certainly raised an eyebrow, but said that because a lot of the crimes have been reported late, then they were not able to do something about it. And certainly this was true in some of the cases, and I must admit in this particular case I should have gone to the police after this, but I had one cannabis plant growing, which at the time I believe was more valuable to me than reporting this chap to the police, quite simply because the story had broken on the internet just around 2012 that cannabis oil cures cancer. So I decided that the plant was more valuable to me than reporting this chap, and by the time I got rid of the plant, Of course, the police weren't interested anymore. So there